in reaching out to others and sharing your values, sharing your beliefs, and sharing your experiences. America wants you to be more involved. Reaching out to people around the world, understanding their concerns, offering partnership and support, and extending the promise of freedom is a noble mission, and it is a mission that involves all of us. At the national level, America builds important relationships through a variety of mechanisms, such as security cooperation arrangements and free trade agreements, like the ones we have with Australia and Chile, Bahrain, Jordan, and Morocco. At the personal level, Americans build relationships through business partnerships and international scientific conferences and academic and cultural exchanges, the kinds of things many of you do daily in your professional lives. As the Holy Quran says, "O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes that ye may know each other." Accept this challenge to reach out more aggressively, to extend freedom and opportunity, and to build a stronger and more interconnected world. Yesterday, I went to Walter Reed Hospital with Ambassador Samir. He's the ambassador from Iraq to the United States. And together we visited the severely wounded, many of whom had lost arms and legs in their commitment to a free Iraq. The ambassador went to Walter Reed Hospital to express his appreciation for the soldiers' service to the Iraqi people, but unfortunately not all of our servicemen and women come home. One person who reached out but did not come home was Ayman Taha, a Berkeley graduate, a budding academic economist, and a native of Sudan. A few years ago, he decided to take a break from his graduate studies to join the U.S. Special Forces. He was patriotic, he believed in the mission, and he wanted to serve. His unit was deployed to Iraq. Earlier this year, Ayman was preparing a cache of munitions for demolition when it exploded, and he was killed. His father was a PhD who worked for the World Bank, and what he said afterwards was profound. His son was a devout Muslim who believed that the message of Islam is very simple: to believe in God and to do good deeds. America is grateful to this remarkable family for their service and sacrifices and their faith in God and in this great nation. That family is very much like the Callahan family of Baltimore when I was a young boy. President Bush said, "There is only one force of history that can break the reign of hatred and resentment and expose the pretensions of tyrants and reward the hopes of decent and tolerant, and that is the hope of human freedom." Today we have the opportunity to draw on our own strong faith, our families, and our communities to help extend the promise of hope and freedom to others. It is not enough simply to appreciate the blessings of liberty. As President Ronald Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. This may be the defining moment for future generations. We all share the responsibility to participate in the noble cause of extending the promise of freedom. This is not a time to be timid. Rather, this is a time to make our voices heard. Making your voice heard is important and necessary to defeat the terrorists' distorted ideologies. I do thank each of you and your families for your patriotism, for your commitment to your communities, for what you do every day to leave a more peaceful and prosperous world for our children and for our grandchildren. God bless you. Salam. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your very valuable thoughts, Honorable Gordon England, Deputy Secretary of Defense. My dear brothers and sisters, as you all can see, we have a very high level of dignitaries and guests. So you can see we have some extra security today. We apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused to any of our participants. Please do enjoy the rest of the evening. We have a wonderful program for the coming next 3 days. Our next distinguished speaker currently serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Professional and Cultural Exchanges in the Department of State's Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. She came to the Department of State in June of 2003 to establish a new office to oversee and manage the President's Middle East Partnership Initiative and served as director. Prior to her appointment at the Department of State, she served as the founding director of the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University since December 2000. She has received several awards and citations. She is the 2001 recipient of the Presidential Distinguished Rank Award for Senior Executive Service and a 1999 recipient of the Presidential Meritorious Rank Award for Senior Executive Service. Her other awards includes 2 Secretary of Defense Meritorious Civilian Service Awards for her contributions. She is a graduate of the University of Chicago, where she received her bachelor's degree in history in 1977 and a master's degree in international relations with a concentration in the Middle East in 1980. She speaks French and has studied Arabic and Hebrew. It's my honor to introduce Alina Romansky, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Educational and Cultural Affairs.
Thank you very much for that very gracious introduction. And let me take a moment here to congratulate Dr. Ingrid Mattson as ISNA's first woman president, and also to congratulate your new vice president, Imam Majid. It's a real pleasure for me to, frankly, be back in my hometown, Chicago. I grew up here. It's also a great pleasure for me to come back and also speak to ISNA. I did so about a year or 2 ago in Dallas, and it's always wonderful for me to come back and speak to this organization. So thank you for that opportunity. I also want to pick up on some of Secretary England's themes that he put forward, and specifically the challenge for the American Muslim community to hear their voices and to engage with us and to engage overseas. I noticed you have quite an agenda for the weekend, and I noticed specifically on Sunday that you will be looking and discussing in a number of panels the ways in which the American Muslim community can engage overseas. I'm also, like Secretary England, was quite moved by the theme of the conference this year, balancing and achieving balance in faith, family, and community. And I would like to echo this concept of balance in my remarks and to put forward this notion of how international dialogue and educational exchange can and must perform a vital balancing act when conflict and confrontation appear so pervasive around the world today. Specifically in my remarks, I'd like to focus on how the Department of State is engaging with both the Arab and the Muslim Americans to play a constructive and proactive role in our public diplomacy efforts around the world. It is already a good deal of engagement, and we are committed to increasing it over the coming months and years. Through the direct involvement of the Arab and Muslim American and organizations such as ISNA and others, we hope to see a level of interaction with our own American Muslim communities and those around the world that is unprecedented. I think as we gaze out at a forbidding Middle East landscape at this moment, a fragile ceasefire in Lebanon, an impasse between Israel and the Hamas-led Palestinian Authority, continuing sectarian violence in Iraq, and Iran's defiance of the Security Council's demand that it live up to its non-proliferation commitments and end its nuclear enrichment program, it would seem appropriate to ask several obvious questions. Can this really be the right moment to talk about educational exchange program and other aspects of our public diplomacy? Should we be asking about ways of building bridges to share knowledge and strengthening mutual understanding? Our answer must be absolutely, unequivocally, now more than ever we need to be doing this. The patient work of public diplomacy and dialogue are more important than ever before to bring a measure of balance and hope to the international scene and to a better understanding between our families, our communities, and our nations. The personal and institutional linkages that we have nurtured for years and for decades, and the new people-to-people initiatives that the Bush administration is launching now, all will become powerful forces tomorrow. They will be forces for understanding, for renewal, for building any kind of peace, for achieving the balance that is vital to our freedom and security as individuals, as Americans, and as citizens of the world. And this is why we are working hard, even in this difficult environment, to protect and expand the wide range and increasing diversity of our educational and cultural diplomacy efforts around the world. Indeed, our commitment to international exchange remains as strong as ever, and that is why, during the conflict in Lebanon, for example, against many odds, we succeeded in getting close to 27 Lebanese high school students out of Lebanon, brought them to the United States so they could join their 600 other colleagues who we bring every year for a one-year exchange to be in our high schools in the United States. For all of these reasons, President Bush has recognized that public diplomacy is an integral tool of U.S. foreign policy. The administration has increased funding for all of our exchange programs substantially. It's up $70 million in last year's budget, and we're asking for another increase of $48 million for this year's budget. Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy Karen Hughes has called upon all Americans to help in supporting our strategic public objectives, and let me just quickly take them off. The first one is clearly to offer a vision of hope to people in the Middle East and throughout the world that is rooted in our commitment to freedom, democracy, religious tolerance, and rule of law. The second is that we must isolate and marginalize the extremists who seek to exploit religion as a justification for violence and terrorism. And finally, we need to join together to foster a community of common interests and shared values. One paradox of public diplomacy, especially in the education and exchange arena is that much of it is not terribly visual or even very visible. These exchanges, in partnership with national and local volunteer organizations, often operate below the radar of newspaper headlines, cable TV, or even the growing blog sphere, for that matter. But we know from long experience and personal testimony that exchanges work, that they are powerful and they are transformational. So let me just take a few moments to talk to you a bit about those quiet exchange and institutional linkages that we've been undertaking the past year, particularly those involving the American Muslim community. The State Department is reaching out in a wide variety of ways to American Muslims, to students, to imams, to social entrepreneurs, academics, professionals, to hear their thoughts and perspectives, as well as to get ideas on how to better exchange our communities here and abroad. And in fact, we have had several meetings at the State Department at various levels with representatives from ISNA and other communities who are, organizations who are represented here. We know that the American Muslim community has played and will continue to play a vital role as we talk about what is taking place overseas. That's why it is so important to reach out to organizations such as yours and others. We've also worked hard to make our exchange programs more strategic, and by that I mean that we focus a great deal of time on, and resources on audiences from Arab and Muslim countries, as well as Muslim and ethnic religious minorities in other nations. We're tailoring our programs to reach young people and those who have the greatest influence on them from outside of their parents, teachers, religious leaders, scholars, and journalists. We've launched programs this year that bring journalists to the United States. We've launched a program that brings women to mentor with our Fortune 500 leaders. And we have started and launched a national security language initiative. All of these programs are designed to engage key influencers in the United States and overseas, and to promote a better understanding between Americans and the Muslim world. In the last 2 years alone, we've supported 4 major exchange programs that promote interfaith dialogue with overseas Muslim participants in Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and the United States. This project, devoted to Islamic life in the United States and organized by the University of Louisville, introduced 27 clerics, religious scholars, and community activists to ISNA and to other organizations. And this exchange program contributed significantly to the establishment of the Iqbal International Institute for Research, Education, and Dialogue that's based in Pakistan. We're also very pleased to note that several institutions also responded to our recent request to continue these types of programs. And while we haven't formally announced them, I will say that your organization, ISNA, is among those who will be continuing to work with us. I also want to thank very much ISNA for a very important role in supporting one of our longest and most important international exchange programs, and that is the International Visitor Leadership Program. This brings more than 4,000 participants to the United States every year. We've seen an expansion in the visitors from predominantly Muslim countries, and I have to thank ISNA for being part of the volunteer organizations and other organizations in the United States who have shared and been part of explaining, introducing, and opening their hearts and homes to the international visitors who we bring here. I want to also highlight one final program, and that is reaching out to American Muslims to speak to Muslims in other parts of the world about identity, life in America, and balancing culture and faith. Under Secretary Hughes, we're launching a new public diplomacy initiative. It's called the Citizen Dialogue. It's an initiative that has allowed Muslim Americans to share the diversity and reality of their American experience with Muslim communities around the world. The first delegation traveled to Europe, where they visited Germany, Netherlands, and Denmark. In that delegation was a student, a doctor, a federal employee, and an imam who took part in youth symposiums, town hall meetings, and various community outreach activities. We're hoping that we'll send out another delegation in very short order to Pakistan and to Kyrgyzstan. In closing, we are engaged in this work not simply for weeks or months, but of years and decades. And from the State Department's perspective, our challenge is not only to address the policy or the political differences that may divide us and our nations, but to promote the fundamental shared values of democracy, human dignity, and individual opportunity that unite us. We must continue to hold fast to these ideals and remember that these truths as we negotiate the challenges of our time. And we call upon your organizations and your community to help us as Americans in doing that, and we very much appreciate your involvement and your willingness to open your homes and also your organizations to working with us on that. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to coming back and updating all of you on what we are doing, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with you in the future. Thank you very much.
This was Alina Ramonsky, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Educational and Cultural Affairs. Very quickly, our next speaker, I had an opportunity to meet him this morning at breakfast, and he is the Deputy Assistant Administrative Bureau for Asia and Near East at USAID. Please welcome Mr. Mark Ward.
Keep it short, he said. All right. I admire your tenacity hanging in there. Let me congratulate the leadership of ISNA, Dr. Madsen. It's wonderful to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum. It's wonderful for USAID to get an opportunity to talk to you about what we do overseas. This is a first for us, and I hope if I do a decent job up here, maybe we'll be invited back. So maybe you can tell me later what sort of remark, what sort of, how they're reacting to my remarks. But I wanted to shift the focus a little bit overseas where we work, because you're taxpayers, and without the taxes that you're paying, you are paying them, right? We wouldn't be able to do the work that we're doing overseas, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, we're a small independent agency. We work very closely with the State Department, with the Defense Department in Washington, and mostly overseas. We have offices in more than 70 countries around the world. By our count, there are 49 countries in the world